Right on time. Happy to be here.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. We will begin shortly. We'll give colleagues from all around the world a moment to join. They'll be coming from their previous calls. While we wait, please do feel free to tell us in the chat where you're joining from today. I am joining from a very rainy Cambridge in the UK. Oh, fantastic. Tunisia. Nesreen, thank you very much for joining. Kigali, Cameroon, Kent, UK. Kent, UK, slightly less exotic to me anyway, but good to have you here. Cape Town again, DRC, Brazil, great with colleagues from LATAM, Sudan, Senegal, Namibia, some people from London as well. Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. I will just wait another minute or two before we get started. So thank you very much for your patience. Fantastic. So many different countries being represented, which is great to see. Nigeria, Hong Kong, Zimbabwe, India. I think we've got all regions covered now, which is fantastic. I think we can get started in a few seconds. Okay, I think we should begin. Um, Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome again. Thank you so much for joining us. Uh, Before we begin, just a note for our French-speaking audience, please note that French live interpretations are available for this event. We have a slide with instructions in a minute or two. A huge thank you all for being here for our latest event in CCAF's Regulator Knowledge Exchange webinar series and our third collaboration with the AfricaNenda Foundation. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's session, From Fragmentation to Integration, the case for a Payment Services Directive for Africa. Before we get started, a very quick introduction about me. My name is Nick Clark. I'm the Director of Technical Assistance at Financial Innovation for Impact and the Cambridge Centre for Alternative Finance. I oversee and direct our portfolio of technical assistance programs that support financial authorities and key stakeholders across the global fintech ecosystem. Our work focuses on increasing regulatory capacity, strengthening supervisory approaches, and supporting the development of safe, inclusive, and enabling regulatory environment for digital financial services. The Regulator Knowledge Exchange, RKE, sits at the heart of this mission. It's a peer-led, community-driven digital platform that connects more than 3,000 public sector and financial authorities professionals from over 300 organizations across 140 countries. If you are a regulator and you're not yet a member of our community, please do join us. One of my colleagues will share a sign-up link in the chat just now. Events like today's are particularly important because they highlight exactly what the RKE was designed to do. Convene regulators and other ecosystem stakeholders around complex regulatory challenges, foster collaborative thinking across regions, and surface insights that directly inform policy design and implementation. The topic we're discussing today, regional harmonization of payment services frameworks, is not only timely, but highly consequential. As many of you working in this space know, fragmentation can create real barriers to interoperability, innovation, and financial inclusion. Exploring models for greater regulatory coordination and alignment across African markets is central to the goals of both our technical assistance work and the RKE community. We're therefore delighted to partner once again with AfricaNenda on this session and to help facilitate this important discussion. So just some housekeeping before we move into the program for today, just a few quick housekeeping notes. Today's session will run for around 90 minutes. We will bring it on time. As mentioned before, English to French translation is available. See instructions on how to access this on the slide just now. We invite you to submit your questions at any time using the Q&A feature. Please do use the chat to connect with colleagues and share reflections throughout. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and we will share with all the participants after the event. So, our agenda for today. We will begin with a presentation on the challenges in cross-border retail payments and the opportunities for policy and regulatory harmonization in Africa, delivered by Serge Mangnanu, Partnership, Advocacy and Capacity Building Specialist at the AfricaNenda Foundation. Then Sabine Mensah, Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the AfricaNenda Foundation, will guide us through a panel discussion and audience Q&A with our esteemed speakers. So I'm delighted to introduce, and perhaps our speakers could put their cameras on just for a couple of minutes. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Patrick Nzana Olomo, Head of Economic Policy and Sustainable Development, Department for Economic Development, Trade, Tourism, Industry and Minerals at the African Union Commission. Dr. Maktar Sek, Chief of Emerging Frontiers Technology, Innovation and Digital Transformation Section at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Kennedy Kipkemboi-Sawe, Director of Public Policy and Advocacy, Mobile Money at GSMA. And Kwame Opong, former Director of FinTech and Innovation at the Bank of Ghana. To close the event today, Dr. Patrick will provide a wrap-up and closing remarks. So a final reminder for our French-speaking audience, please note that French live interpretations are available for this event. And finally, and again, you're most welcome and encouraged to use the chat function throughout today's session. Please ask questions, share your reflections, and engage with the panelists in today's discussion. Serge, I'll now hand over to you for our opening presentation. I know you're having a little bit of voice issues, so I hope your voice makes it through the presentation. Thank you very much again, everyone, for joining. I hope you enjoy the session.
Thank you very much, Nick, and sorry for my voice, everyone. So, as an introduction to our conversation with our panelists, for the next 10 minutes or so, we are going to explore the reasons why the PSDA is necessary, where do we stand, and what are the next steps to its actualization. Across Africa, over 400 million adults remain financially excluded. These are individuals who cannot safely save, pay, or transact digitally, especially across borders. At the same time, MSMEs account for over 80% of employment and a significant share of GDP across African economies. Yet, these MSMEs face an estimated $300 billion financing gap. And even when opportunities exist across borders, payments remain a major bottleneck. Eventually, retail digital cross-border payments matter because they enable MSMEs to access regional markets. They support trade under the African Continental Free Trade Area. They reduce reliance on cash and informal channels. And ultimately, they accelerate financial inclusion and economic integration. Despite progress in Africa, we all know the reality on the ground. Today, Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest remittance cost globally at 7.8%. Cross-border payment providers face limited and inconsistent licensing regimes. Digital financial service policies remain highly fragmented. And there is a pervasive lack of regulatory certainty for providers that want to scale beyond national borders. Even when instant payment systems exist domestically, they stop at the borders. The results: payments are slow, costs remain high, and innovation is constrained within borders. Considering this context and building on research, the evidence points towards the opportunity for regulatory harmonization. So what is the Payment Service Directive for Africa? The PSDA is a proposed continental directive designed to create a mechanism guiding the harmonization of payment policy and regulatory frameworks, and designed to facilitate instant digital retail cross-border payments. The PSDA intends to take inspiration from best practices of regulatory harmonization from the continent and beyond. Other continents and regions have set precedents on the feasibility and benefits of continental regulatory harmonization efforts, like, for example, the European Union Payment Service Directives, PSD2, PSD3, and the ASEAN Payment Policy Framework. Of course, this effort of harmonization is not happening in isolation. The Africa Union Commission, in collaboration with the AfricaNenda Foundation and partners, has been deliberately building continental consensus around the PSDA. That approach includes tabling the PSDA concept at the AUC Specialized Technical Committees convenings on finance, monetary affairs, economic planning, and integration. Those committees occurred in 2024 and 2025, and it was for public sector and member states endorsement. For example, next week, on the 13th of February, the AUC and AfricaNenda Foundation organize a dialogue convening on the implementation of the PSDA. It will be held on the margin of the Africa Union Head of States and Government Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. That overall approach of the AUC also includes structured consultations with stakeholder organizations to align on prerequisites and best practices. These consultations are culminating with an ongoing feasibility study that identifies winning and realistic implementation approaches to the PSDA implementation. And finally, of course, that approach includes the delivery of knowledge resources to ensure shared understanding and sustained commitment. So what? So far, the next steps are to establish a PSDA task force as a coordination mechanism. That will be done next week in Addis Ababa. Next steps include completing the ongoing feasibility study. The results are coming soon, in a couple of weeks. And we are going to continue to deepen stakeholder engagements and consensus building through various advocacy platforms and events. And eventually, the PSDA feasibility report and implementation roadmap will be presented to the Africa Union heads of states for endorsement. Now, let us be clear about one thing. This work cannot move alone. A PSDA will only succeed if stakeholders unite along critical initiatives. When regulators needs to share best practices, when champions raise up for interoperability and risk proportionate licensing, or when commitments are made on resources and expertise to support PSDA policy drafting, capacity building, and regulatory implementation. Payments are a network industry. Fragmented action can only produce fragmented outcomes. And again, let's not forget the cost of inaction. Persistently high payment costs, lost economic opportunities, continued exclusion of MSMEs from cross-border trade, slower implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area and stalled progress on financial inclusion. So Africa's payment revolution is already underway. The question is whether policy and regulation will enable it or constrain it. The Payment Services Directive for Africa is not about copying external models. It's about crafting Africa's own path, one that reflects our markets, our innovation, and our ambitions. Now, let us seize this moment. The future of Africa payments ecosystem is now. Thank you. I will end here, hoping that this introduction set the stage for a fruitful conversation on the PSDA. Over to you, Sabine, now.
Thank you very much, Serge. Very well said. I think I will pass it on to Dr. Patrick for a welcoming speech before we start the panel discussion. Dr. Patrick, to you.
Thank you very much, Sabine, and good afternoon, good evening, or good morning to you all. It is a pleasure for me to be part of this exciting program today, which for us is a journey that projects Africa in the next steps of its development. On behalf of the African Union Commission and on behalf of the whole African Union, I would like to take this opportunity, first of all, to thank you, Sabine, for organizing this meeting and for our dear co-conveners of this event. That comes at an opportune time. As you may recall, we had excellent discussions just a month ago with central bank governors of the African Union, and they have committed to see this process moving forward because it is a task that needs to be done to ensure that our payment systems are fully operating at the level that is expected. I don't want to take much of your time at this moment because I do know that we have an exciting panel that will start in just a few seconds. We stand ready to provide all the political leadership and the guidance that is required to move this agenda forward. We take this opportunity to sincerely appreciate our partners who have supported us since inception of this project, and we do believe that we are delivering tangible results and making key progress as we move forward. With this, I welcome you all to this excellent event today, hoping that you will enjoy it, but more importantly, hoping that you will engage firmly in this process to push it to the next levels. Thank you very much, and over to you, Sabine.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patrick. I am really thrilled to facilitate this conversation, and I'm asking all of my panelists to be on video so we can start the discussion. I think from a starting point, what I'm going to ask is of you, and in 1 minute, and trust me, I'm going to try to manage time as much as I can, but I will cut you if you are going too long. So I have apologized already before for this. But if each of you can take 1 minute and really share with me what you think is the most critical policy or regulatory friction today that prevents seamless retail cross-border payments in Africa to scale. Why should we prioritize discussions like this around harmonization payment systems framework? I think that could already be a good opening of our conversation. So who wants to jump in, or I'm happy to call names? Kwame, you start. You're the first one on my screen, so let's go.
Okay, sure. No, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, evening, wherever you're listening from. But the first thing that comes to mind, to be honest, is a matter of trust. Ultimately, this is trust among the users and the service providers, or for the service providers, but also trust among regulators. Because ultimately, I think if you're able to build a certain level of comfort and trust amongst each other at both an individual and institutional level, I think it allows the possibility for collaboration and cooperation to address seemingly difficult to surmount problems. So I think the biggest issue to address is trust. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kennedy, how about you give us a private sector view of this? What's the biggest friction?
Greetings, everybody, and Sabine, it's really good to be here with all these amazing panelists. Looking at things from a private sector point of view, I think the biggest friction currently is the fragmentation of the different frameworks across the region, and speaking here for Africa. And case in point, when you try to transfer international money transfer for some of the service providers, it can be a bit challenging. And when you zoom in to understand what exactly the issue is, you may realize that countries actually have very different frameworks which impede this, and perhaps part of what we'll be happy to discuss today.
Wonderful. I like the way this conversation is going, building trust. We have a fragmented ecosystem. Maktar, what's your view?
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, where you are. I think the two previous speakers already highlight the key important issue. For us at UN Continental Commission, biggest challenge is the fragmentation of the Africa digital payment system. And when we go down, we could look at on the policy and regulatory friction in the cross-border payment in Africa. And we can look at the foreign exchange fragmentation. For instance, there is no harmonizing foreign exchange rules in limited convertibility. Also, we need to incorporate this system such as a Pan-African payment settlement system. I think it is essential. Another big friction is a customer due diligence rules that are used to identify, because despite we have now 80% to coverage of the foundation of ID, we need also a broad system where we can identify people to help to verify and understand customer and to prevent money laundering, fraud, and other illicit financial activity across the continent. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Dr. Patrick, your perspective, please.
Thank you, Sabine. In fact, the three first speakers, I think they have eloquently highlighted the importance of the work that we're doing. But I want to insist on one thing, which is fundamental, and it is about regulatory uncertainties. Because let's imagine a continent of 55, member states. You can imagine the regulatory burden that the private sector can have, to try to transact in those 55, single markets. So there is need for us, and it is important that we deal with this fragmentation and that we create the space of a unified regulatory framework that speaks to our dream, which is the dream of a united, unfragmented, but prosperous market. So how do we do it? We do it by putting in place the rules, putting in place the regulations, and dealing with the issues that the private sector is confronted with. So that is what we have seen as potential at the African Union when we supported the idea that came from AfricaNenda to have the PSDA developed, because the PSDA is responding to one of the critical challenges that we have on the continent if we are to transact in a way that provides opportunities for economic development. Back to you, Sabine.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Patrick. And as a matter of fact, let's continue with you. I mean, we have the Africa Digital Transformation Strategy. We also have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Digital Trade Agenda. Now we are talking about a Payment Service Directive for Africa, which incidentally will support the delivery of digital trade, will support the delivery of Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So the question for you is, how does the AU see its role in ensuring coordination of these different mechanisms, coherence across the different countries, and consistent messaging policy signal, particularly with regard to cross-border payments? Now, I will ask you and all of the other panelists to please speak slowly, because we have translation for French, and we really want to make sure that we are all getting the gist of the message that's being shared here, regardless of language. To you, Dr. Patrick.
Thank you very much. Very pertinent question, but let me put it clearly. The first thing we have to understand is that the PSDA is not competing with all of these continental instruments are in place already. The African Continental Free Trade Area speaks about a unified market. And if you read the Abuja Treaty, which is our boussole for economic integration, you can see that our forefathers, they have thought that fragmented markets cannot achieve economic transformation and development. It is important, therefore, to understand that there is need for us to have the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is a unified market of 1.4 billion people today, with expectations to have a market of 2.5 or 2.7 billion people in just 2 decades, which means that Africa alone will be a market that will surpass the market of India and China combined and be the workforce of the 21st century. This major shift is also correlating with the setting up of the digital transformation strategy that outlines, the key priorities that Africa is carrying forward to have a market that is, significantly shaped with a vision of a unified ecosystem. In that perspective, what is the PSDA bringing on the table? The PSDA is building this vision and the market together to make sure that we have regulatory harmonization and rules that speak to the issues that we're dealing with. I like to take an example that is a simple example to understand what the PSDA can be. Imagine when you buy a car. When you buy a car, you have the manual guide that gives you the operational processes that are effective in allowing you to drive effectively the car and to avoid, creating imbalances that will damage the car. That is the PSDA. The PSDA is not contradicting the African Continental Free Trade dream of a unified market, but rather it is solidifying this vision and this aspiration to make it practical. In practice, what we have here is that with the mandate that was given to the African Union Commission and to AfricaNenda, and now to the central banks of the continent, we are working with the Association of African Central Banks. We have to understand that we have a unified political mandate to design and operate the PSDA, because the instructions of the STC, the Specialized Technical Committee on Finance, which is the ministerial body of the African Union, bringing together all the ministers of finance and central bank governors, has mandated the Commission, with the support of AfricaNenda and the AACB Secretariat, to build the PSDA. This PSDA is fully aligned with the continental instruments that are designed, and in that perspective, it is embedding in a coordinated approach that structurally supports the implementation of all these programs. The AFCFTA Secretariat will be part of this process because we have regular consultations. We spoke about the meeting that is upcoming on the 13th of February here in Addis Ababa. We have invited the African Continental Free Trade Secretariat, and we have received a positive response from the Secretariat. They will be part of the discussion. The Pan-African Payment and Settlement System also will be part of the conversation, and all the other important stakeholders that are prominent in the space of digital payment systems have been duly invited and will be part of the conversation. I do know that we have also continental institutions such as UNECA who will support us in this process. So you can see that it is a coordinated approach. It is a unified approach that is leading us to the next steps of that. And more importantly, we have discipline in communication, because we are communicating effectively to make sure that all the stakeholders are aware of the importance of the PSDA as a tool for economic transformation, and that all of us, we work to build it in a much more harmonized way that will allow us to address the challenges that Africa is facing in this 21st century. don't let me continue because I will take different directions. I hope I have responded. So back to you, Sabine.
Thank you very much. You know, Dr. Patrick, I was going to say, I've given you some leeway on this first question, but I meant it when I said I was going to cut everybody. So thank you very much for the answer. And I think it's an answer on which I would ask Dr. Mactar to build on. You know, from your perspective, you know, how do we position this PSDA initiative to be complementary to the, you know, digital transformation strategy for Africa, the AfCFTA instrument, and we also have at the Regional Economic Communities level instrument also and frameworks. So how do we ensure that this complementarity, knowing that I think all of you have mentioned some level of fragmentation and maturity on the policy and regulatory framework across Africa?
Thank you very much. I mean, I just going to follow my colleague from AUC, but it is essential to prioritize institutional alignment as a financial facilitator of the FCTA, single market, when you talk about this PSDA. How? By actively addressing regulatory fragmentation, of course, the PSDA directly can advance the core AfCFTA objective of reducing both tariff and non-tariff barrier. I think it is very important in the context of the CFTA. In the context of the digital transformation, Africa digital transformation strategy, you all know the digital transformation, the pillar on digital financial service articulated the overarching vision for an integrated digital economy, which the PSDA can operationalize through defined regulation standard. For this, it's essential that the PSDA should establish a cross-border supervisory coordination mechanism to foster all this collaboration among regulators in oversight, enforcement, and risk management. Also, you talk about REX, and the PSD should function as a continental-wide minimum rule books for payment service to define the minimum principle for interoperability, consumer protection, and licensing. And this will enable the country and REX to adopt this regulation progressively in line with their respective regulatory capacity. We can have several examples in the continent. For instance, the East African Payment System and the SADC Integrated Regional Electronic Settlement System can serve as a foundation building block. Also, it is necessary to develop a common structure that clearly map existing instrument and frame policy and regulatory harmonization to facilitate efficiency and cost-effective instant retail cross-border payment. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mactar. I see the passion in the discussion. I am begging for slower communication so we enable our translators to represent well what you're sharing with us. Kennedy, I want to move to you and I want to focus the discussion on impact on end user. Oftentimes, discussions on policy and regulation seems to be going on a silo, but at the end of the day, the regulatory framework intent is to make this usable, fast, convenient, easier for end users. So with that in mind, I really would like to hear from you in terms of which regulatory frictions you think most affect the end user and particularly consumers and MSMEs today, and what should be prioritized in our efforts to harmonize framework for seamless cross-border payments in Africa.
Thank you, Sabine. I think I get excited when I hear about consumers because I think they're the most important stakeholder that we need to have in these discussions. I think to really bring it home, it's very hard to narrow down to one regulatory issue because they're all intertwined. So you will find that one issue will somehow touch on another issue and all that. But let me zoom into a use case and connect it to a regulatory challenge to that. And when you look at the African consumer and why they would need to be able to look at, regional, regulations and harmonizations, what is the main thing that the consumer needs to do? The main thing they need to do is to be able to send money across board, be it for trade or to send money back home if you're an immigrant in another country. And now we're looking at immigration being an intra-Africa thing more than anything else, right? So think of yourself as a consumer in a country and you want to be able to send money back home. But the moment you want to do that, it becomes cumbersome. it means there's a problem. Either the problem is a private sector provider or the private sector is actually limited by something. And so here we're looking at what some of the implications have been actually on IMT. What we've noticed, particularly as an industry, is that Africa has, in a large way, institutionalized restrictions on how to send money outside countries. And this is a broader conversation because different countries have different approaches to foreign exchange controls. And frankly, it's a difficult conversation. It's a broader conversation because countries have reasons why they would want to do that. But by and large, it should be possible to send money at least inwardly from other parts of the world and all that. So I think there's a conversation that needs to happen as to how we can be able to trade one another as Africa first, beyond even just thinking about, intracontinental trade or intercontinental trade. But then again, when you look at this issue of IMT, Sabine and colleagues, I think what is also very important is to also understand how corporate clients want to trade in Africa, because Africa trades in mobile money, for instance. But unfortunately, in most cases, as we see, the regulations which are required for such entities to be able to operate, particularly, maybe being able to leverage mobile money services to be able to transfer money that can be used for their businesses is not very clear. So there's a lack of clarity on certain regulations which would actually allow services such as Jumia or any e-commerce platform that may want to launch in a different country that they can look up to be able to say, hey, we can actually use mobile money to leverage our trade in this area. That said, it's not something that can actually be handled simply because there are other underlying issues that actually lead to that. And when you look at some of the issues that actually countries may need to also look into, closely to that is there issues such as data sovereignty laws, which are also very related to this as well. So as I said, again, it's very hard to pinpoint one particular issue, but the thing that we really need to look at here is then how then can we look at regulatory frameworks that will allow us to be able to send money from one country to another country and vice versa seamlessly.
Yes, I really would like that. I sit in Nairobi. I use mobile money very often. I would like to be able to do as instantly a transaction from Nairobi, Kenya to Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, where my mother sits. Thank you. Let's continue discussion from a private sector angle. Kwame, I want to come to you. I think there's a key role for the private sector in the ecosystem, and particularly also in enabling cross-border payments. Ghana is often cited as one of the most advanced markets with the participation of non-bank in providing instant payment in the country. So what I would like to hear from you is what are the trade-offs that regulator had to face to provide this enabling environment for private sector to integrate instant payment system and compete on it? And what are some of the lessons that we can learn or take into consideration while walking the path for the Payment Service Directive for Africa?
Well, thank you very much, Sabine. And this is an important reflective lesson that has been learned in Ghana's case over the past decade and over. Foundationally, we started a process, my colleagues continue to work on this with a thought in mind that we have clarity in processes, clarity in understanding in order to achieve a certain goal. Because one of the things that you notice is even when the regulatory functions and the private sector have the same goal, you seem to be speaking different languages. So something as basic as even defining taxonomies and defining processes for licensing applications. These are all very simple things, at a high level, but make a big difference in creating shared understanding for proper interaction. But you also have a posture that also needs to change. And that's what we try to do, which has to do with whether you continue to feed the sector with traditional supervisory approaches, or whether you explore practical and pragmatic supervisory approaches. So that comes to some of the, it ultimately comes to the achievement of some of the outcomes that we saw, some of the policy elements that you would see. I'll give you an example. One goes back to the whole continent now, right? So something like tiered KYC. Had we not been bold enough as a continent, and even Ghana tried this in our Initial Payments Act, to explore and introduce tiered KYC what would have happened to the story of financial inclusion in Ghana or Africa at large? And today, it's not just been accepted, it's adequately captured in FATF's rules. Similarly, we had to look at things like merchant payment, an area that there's a combination of participants, but if you looked at very carefully, especially the participation of non-banks, was not being adequately covered in a way that made it a viable business for them and gave them enough control, particularly from a commercial standpoint. And it has implications on things like investments and the rest. So we had to go look at that again and recategorize all of that when I was with the central bank. And finally, one thing that we also looked at the time was simply one area that was an important area for us, which is remittances. Fintechs continue to play a key role in bringing efficiency, better and improved innovation, costs enhancement. All these were coming through the participation of fintechs. However, the frameworks did not quite permit them to participate effectively. And so again, we had to be able to take a step back and look at this. The reason why I highlight this is there are some commonalities that can be learned as lessons in the development of a PSD for Africa. First principle thinking is a must and should be encouraged. In the absence of everything we have now, because the moment we start talking about some of these challenges, we immediately, this room is full of people, whether panelists or participants, is full of people with so many ideas and so much experience. And so when we start to look at these problems, we can immediately start pointing to some of these framework issues, the variations in our various markets in terms of our approaches to, for instance, implementing something as simple as due diligence on customers, currency convertibility issues. We can look at so many problems. But the one thing is, are we prepared to take an open-minded position to say, if none of these existed, where would we start from? And that lesson is very important. The second thing is that you put consumers and users at the center of all of this. The users and consumers, the individuals and the striving as MSMEs and all these businesses that we're hoping to help to ultimately improve livelihoods, but also bring economic growth, they have to be at the center of this conversation. So affordability, ease of access, robust, recourse frameworks are important. And I like when Dr. Patrick made reference to the engagement that was being done at the AU level and seeking to bring key players, because engagement is that next thing, that the ecosystem is properly represented and not in a way that perhaps leaves out some key stakeholders. Practicality I've touched on, so I'll perhaps mention the final thing, which I think is very important. Many international and global standards and principles are critical for us to consider, but I think we have to also be confident in exploring how they can be localized to achieve the same outcomes without necessarily creating a constraint to progress and growth, and being able to implement some of these elements that we're looking at. So looking at that journey that we've been through and continues till today, it is important that we employ some of these lessons as we explore the development of a PSD for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kwame. And yes, we don't have to start from scratch. We can certainly, look at what has been done. There have been several initiatives of harmonization in Africa already, and take these lessons and move forward as we look at the PSDA. And yes, the room is full of people. I think I saw 226 people online already on this discussion. So we will certainly try our best to tap into the ecosystem and ensure that there are very wide consultation across the board. Dr. Patrick, let me come back to you. So we are saying there is fragmentation, different regulatory maturity, different infrastructure across the continent. So the question I want to ask you is, does sequencing matter in this journey? What should come first? When needs to come later? And also, what are some of the governance arrangements that need to be embedded in this process to ensure that we have this alignment that Dr. Maktar mentioned, and we are all seem key on, making sure that this is an inclusive process?
Thank you very much, Sabine. And the question is still extremely pertinent because what we have to understand when we look at the dynamics of reforms, and you can see that globally, when you operate reforms, there are clear rules in terms of sequencing. You have to have a clear sequencing or sequence process that allows you to build and to move to different steps without overlapping and without losing time. And in that perspective, we have taken a very pragmatic approach, which in our perspective provides an important steps, with the point being that we want to move towards a greater alignment on the continent. And for that, we have several phases. The first one is about starting by building the foundations. And those foundations, we have first looked at how we can harmonize, the rules and what are the rules that are already in place, which is essential to understand the basics of interoperability within the continent, what is already working and what has not yet worked. And in that perspective, we have been working to agree on common categories for payment system providers, and also to look at the baseline consumer protection standards that are important in this process. And we have aligned it with some of the international best practices on AML and CFT requirements to ensure that there is broad alignment here. We have also looked at what has been done already. We have the PAPS, as we said, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. How do we make sure that we build a system that connects it effectively on the continent? On phase 2, we are looking at enabling a variable geometric approach. And on this approach, we would like to take the example of regions that have already started this journey. Regions like, West African Monetary Zone or the East African Community are already advanced in such processes. So there is need for us to look at what they have done already and to move faster to deeper harmonization. And in this, as we said, we are not starting from scratch. It is not like nothing has been done yet. There are initiatives and there are actions already ongoing. There is only need for us to look at how we bring them together and to scale them up. Thirdly, we are looking at building, an adaptability or an adaptive process. And in this, the PSDA must be a living framework that is not just cast in stone. It is a process. It is a reflections, that drives us in the next steps of our development. So it is a flexible process where we will institutionalize, a regulatory review mechanism that allows us, to question ourselves on things that are working and things that can be done better. So that is how we see it. But on the governance side, we do believe that the technical leadership rests with the African Association of Central Banks, which is, the Association of Central Banks of the continent. We have 41 central banks. So those central banks are in an association, and that association is our lead in this process. Just to tell you that we are following due process to ensure that the key stakeholders that are relevant in this process are embarked in the process. Remember when we met with central bank governors in Yaoundé in November, they were extremely happy about the process and the progress that we've made in a year of work since we had the mandate of the Specialized Technical Committee. So you see, we have the technical leadership with central banks. We have the operational delivery of the PSDA task force that is under shaping. We are still shaping it, but we already have, part of the important stakeholders that have embarked on this process. And we have the political mandate and stewardship of the AUC, with the African Union being the convening body of the union. And lastly, there is need for us to understand that the PSDA will focus on harmonized outcomes. And this is what we truly believe Africa should aim to achieve. Because with a harmonized market that we are aiming to build under the AfCFTA, it will be extremely important for us to make sure that we have regulatory harmonization across the board and that we can see payment systems effectively delivering on the goals that we have set to deliver. So that is what I can say for now. And back to you, Sabine, to stick on the time.
Thank you very much. This is my last round of questions, and then I see a lot of questions in the Q&A, so I want to make sure that we are saving time for questions of the participants in the call. Dr. Bakhtar, I want to come to you. I know UNECA has supported multiple regional, continental harmonization initiatives beyond payments. So really would like to hear from you what design futures or process choices or lessons from these experiences we should take into consideration as we are starting this path for the Payment Service Directive for Africa. Dr. Bakhtar?
Thank you so much for this question. You are right. We are supporting a lot of continental framework, working closely with African Union Commission and as a partner. And from this extensive portfolio, a specific case highlight a critical lesson from the PSD from ECA. Just on area of cybersecurity. You know, we have this Africa model, cybersecurity, Malabo Convention on cybersecurity. In some issue missing, and we develop also this model laws guidelines that country could adopt quickly and produce legal and policy framework on cybersecurity. And from there, the PSDA can also develop guideline, roadmap, and template for customer protection, cross-border data sharing, and licensing. When we come to the technical support for ECA to create harmonized mechanisms for cross-border trade across the continent, and our experience of supporting policy advancement of continental policy, such as the AU data governance framework, the AU AI strategy, even the establishment of the AfCFTA, the PSD can learn from there to process from the outset and also establish a strict forum for regulator, market operator, including fintech and mobile network operator and consumer advocacy group to co-design the standard. It is something we have to work all together for the benefits of the continent. When we come to digital ID, I talk about the importance of digital ID for access to this cross-border market. ECA is pioneering the development of digital ID and also the interoperable technique standard for digital ID, rather than prescribing a single system. It is our approach. And this allows our experience, allow countries like Mauritius and Ghana to implement different technological solutions that can still communicate across the border. It is our experience, I think, PSDA can learn about. And at the end, it is the conclusion. At the end, what we need it is to integrate AfCFTA and the digital protocol and the PSDA to build this digital single market. And this need legal framework, electronic contract, data flow, payment system, and the PSD should serve as the financial infrastructure enabling all this role and acting not a separate regulation, but as the transactional core of the AfCFTA digital market. Thank you. Marketplace, digital marketplace. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bakhtar. I absolutely agree with you to operationalize the ambitions of the AfCFTA to unlock cross-border trade, the millions of MSMEs that are engaged into cross-border trade. We need to facilitate cross-border payment. It needs to be as seamless as I can do a transaction here in the same country to somebody who is next door. We should be able to do that across borders, across all our countries in Africa. So thank you very much. And I agree also that we don't have to start from scratch. We really have lessons, we have processes, We have similar initiative of harmonization we can build on to ensure that we are fast tracking our pathway towards the realization of this PSDA. Thank you very much. Kwame, I'll come to you, and then my last question will be for Kennedy, and we can go into the Q&A session, because I always love these Q&A sessions. Kwame, we recognize that to enable cross-border payment, it is critical there is some sort of licensing framework for the private sector providers, the fintechs, the operators that are in one country to accelerate their expansion in other countries. And I know that Ghana and Rwanda have piloted this fintech licensing, passporting initiative. So maybe you can tell us more about this initiative and how, or what lessons, I would say, we can learn from it that could help, steer the way for the PSDA.
Well, thank you. And this comes off the back of a point that Dr. Olong also made earlier about the founding fathers and their intent. And one of the reasons for the creation of OAU, the Organization of African Unity, was not just for political integration. It was also economic integration. I have never forgotten since the previous Secretary General, I only mentioned that at an event, because it's an important call to, call to action for all of us, individuals and institutions. And when you look at the fact that you have a continent full of ideas, young people, and so much potential, and the creative sector, and when I say the creative sector, I'm referring to both the art side of the creative sector as well as the technology side, because they also are part of that creative community. If you look at the role they can play in facilitating and enhancing trade, and yet e-commerce is restricted and limited as a result of the same issues that we're talking about, the barriers in the framework, the barriers from country to country framework, even the difficulty of movement of persons, then you have to effectively start looking at things from the perspective of starting small. Who are the potential willing actors you can start with, and how do you initiate something as small a first step as it must be? So the first thing is, if you consider the fact that the fintechs that we're licensing and supervising cannot scale to the level that we need them to scale to. That's one reality we have to be careful about. We have a big enough market as a continent, but country by country, we do not have enough of an addressable market in order for them to scale. So that's the first problem we have to be looking at, and that's one of our motivations when we engage with Rwanda. And I believe it's the same with them as well. And so the second aspect has to do with the issue of policy, the fact that policy and central banks played a role in this process. You cannot, and we have a proverb in Ghana that says, you cannot tie a knot without a thumb. Central banks particularly play a very important role in this whole ecosystem and in this whole idea of cross-border payments and settlements. But to the extent that most central banks are also regulating actors in this space, they become even more important in that discussion. And so the case of Rwanda and Ghana, there were so many lessons that we learned. Interestingly, when we first initiated this process, we didn't realize, just individually studying our countries and our frameworks, we didn't realize how much similarity that we had between our frameworks. And that's a very important point, because I think often our focus is to try to resolve the differences and the variations in our frameworks. But the reality is there's a lot more that we have in common than we have different, in different frameworks. So that's one thing to highlight. The second thing is, I like this conversation because what you're seeing is, with the participation of the ecosystem and the participation of key institutions within this continent, what you're seeing is leadership commitment. In the central bank context between Ghana and Rwanda, it was executive leadership at the governor's level, at the directorial level, and then subsequently also at the operational level. And that work continues till today. My successor and the team are working actively on it, and so are the folks on the Rwanda side as well. Then there's this challenge that you're always confronted with. If you look at the problems, it often seems insurmountable. But the issue is, we can actually start to address the small, the low-hanging fruit and the small problems that we think we can at least start to address and test, right? So you're starting small, you're looking for areas of commonality, and you're allowing yourself the safe space to test. That allows the process to continue to move forward, even as you try to figure out the bigger problems for which you don't immediately have solutions to. Then the last two things I'll highlight: you cannot approach these conversations having sacred cows. And this comes to the first point, the question you asked about trust. We need to be able to trust each other enough to be able to be open-minded to new models, new architectures, and yes, new technology. And if that new technology also includes things like blockchain, I think we have to be open-minded to that. But finally, the one thing that I believed between both countries, what continued to drive us to explore this, is the fact that we didn't lose sight of who we're doing this for and why we're doing this whole thing. It was about the individuals, it was about businesses, it was about the improvement of livelihoods, and it was about the improvement of the economic value to all of us. So these are some of the lessons that I think, based on what I experienced with the Ghana-Rwanda collaboration happen. Ultimately, I think fintechs will benefit long-term from it, but these are the principles that I think are transferable as we explore an Africa-wide Payment Services Directive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kwame. And Kennedy, last question to you before we dive into the Q&A section. We all recognize the key role of the private sector in, of course, building markets, enabling seamless cross-border payment. And we want to make sure that the private sector is represented and driving contribution to enable implementable policy design. We cannot have the regulation and the policies build this in silo and then bring the private sector to say, now go implement. So how do we build this bridge? How do we ensure participation meaningful of the private sector into the process of the PSDA?
Yeah, I mean, Sabine, it's an excellent question. And when you look at regulations, often not, they begin, of course, being written down in a very theoretical way. But it's very important to recognize how practical they can be. And over the years, what we've realized is that the more you involve the actual implementers of that, the more successful it will be. And to Kwame's point, I think, being able to capture some of these contextual issues, like building trust, building transparency, can only happen in a dialogue setup. And so it's very important to institutionalize, stakeholder engagement and consultation. Often not, it might not be written on paper. And when it's not written on paper, sometimes it can be skipped, and we've seen instances where this is skipped. But the moment it is written down, it is actually something that is followed. It's actually ended up being something that has to be followed through a policy formulation process, which is very important. But why is this important? When you look at the sector that we are looking at here, the ecosystem is very wide. And people have businesses have very different use cases. When you look at the banking sector, when you look at the fintech space, when you look at the mobile money, the traditional mobile money players, they have very different modeling, particularly around commercial modeling. When you look at how they do their technical, security specifications and all that. And so it's very important to understand how some things will work for a particular sector instead of assuming that a one-size-fits-all will work. And these are some of the things that, a consultative process would be able to bring up and say, this might work for this sector, but it might not work for this sector. How then do we make it work for this particular sector and for everybody who is involved? That said, I think in the process of also consultations, we've also seen that a lot also comes to play, a lot comes to fore, because again, financial services and the ecosystem that you're looking at, and issues around financial health and all that are not static. They constantly keep evolving, which means that these conversations need not to be very momentary. They need to keep happening. And this goes to the issue of keeping an open door policy for every player to come in to be able to have a say. In particular, now in this particular conversation we're having here, how do we ensure that the door is always open, even after the process is finalized? Because there will always be a need to be able to tweak a thing or here and there. And most importantly, also to ensure then, how do we ensure that this particular policy harmonizes with the other domestic realities that we get to see in the different markets?
Very well said. Very well said. Thank you so much to all of you for sharing your perspective of us and enabling this rich conversation. So we had some questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to go through it, and I might direct some to a particular person depending on the question, and also have some time for all of us to intervene and provide perspective. For me, what resonated from this conversation so far, really anchoring in solving a problem that consumers, businesses, MSMEs face, and knowing that such resolution is actually going to have so much more impact beyond the fact that we are all able to do it. It has an amazing potential on the economic growth of our countries, enabling, intra-Africa trade, enabling more resources on the continent. So it remains a key priority for all of us to find a solution. And we recognize also that perhaps one of the biggest challenge is the regulatory piece first, because technology has already solved this. We can interlink different instant payment system or regional payment system for that matter. So let me try first questions I've gotten here. Kwame, this is probably yours because it's a question on trust. And the question is, does trust support the building of solid structures, or do we need trustworthy systems and structures to build trust?
Oh, thank you. I was looking at that question and thinking about it. And I think the reality is that let's not worry about the chicken and egg situation with it. Let's build systems that are trustworthy, but at the same time too, let's build trust with each other. And what's most important is, as it stands today, and I'll give you an example, when it comes to simple background check on individuals behind businesses and corporations, Ghana trusts Rwanda's vetting system. And if that's the case, why don't we start from there? So you may find situations of low trust, which is unfortunate, but it's also a practical reality. But where there's high trust, collaborate on that. Let's take advantage of that. Where there's no low trust, let's build on that. And perhaps systems and processes are in place to ensure that in the absence of trust, those things are there. And I should even highlight today, let's not forget, we have a whole technology ecosystem that is built and considered trustless for environments where I may never trust you, you may never trust me. And the architecture is designed to ensure that everyone is protected, even where there's no trust. So I think it's not a matter of which one comes first. It's a matter of let's do both.
Okay, thank you very much. Kennedy, I want to ask you as well, because I know from your perspective on enabling for the end user, trust is also a component. So what's your perspective on this question?
Yes, I think at the end of the day, money is about trust. And so the moment the consumer loses trust, then they will not trust the entire, solution or platform that you're bringing to him or her. So I think at the end of the day, it's very important to have trust, particularly when you're designing products and services. And in some instances, when this is not embedded in that process, then it will be lost, along the path. And so when coming up with some of these initiatives, particularly in this case, a regional initiative that will actually allow how we can, allow us to integrate our platforms, it's good to have product development at the back of our minds and how trust would actually be involved in that process, and how then can this be written within a regulatory framework to ensure it is actually done. Because at the end of the day, granted, private sector has its own ambitions to do things, but it's also very important to have very clear guidelines as to how trust can be embedded within the policy framework.
All right. Dr. Maktar, I have a question in French, so I will come to you and ask you if you can answer it in French. But in the meantime, Dr. Patrick, there's a question about how national central banks, are they being carried along on this journey, especially with the expectation of the importance of this work for the realization of the AFCFTA? Do you want to comment on that? You're on mute.
Yes. May you allow me to comment maybe in French to make sure that we bring, equity and, work to our interpreters.
Yes, maybe give me 1 minute. I'm asking for people who were on the English line, the Anglophone, to switch to French so that they can understand your intervention. Go ahead, Dr. Patrick, à vous.
Oui, ce qu'il faut comprendre et qui est simple, c'est que, comme nous l'avons dit dans nos premières soumissions, le processus dans lequel nous sommes embarqués aujourd'hui est un processus inclusif. C'est un processus au sein duquel les banques centrales sont partie prenante et sont des acteurs clés et des acteurs majeurs de ce processus. C'est eux qui dirigent en fait le travail que que nous élaborons ensemble. Dans cette perspective-là, nous travaillons avec l'organe suprême des banques centrales, qui est l'Association africaine des banques centrales. L'Association africaine des banques centrales est l'instance qui nous a donné le mandat à Yaoundé il y a 2 mois de travailler avec son secrétariat sur l'élaboration de de ce nouvel instrument. Donc, de ce point de vue-là, c'est une approche inclusive et toutes les banques centrales, et je le dis bien, les 41 banques centrales africaines sont parties de ce processus-là et nous avons le mandat de travailler avec elles pour qu'il n'y ait pas de différence dans ce que nous allons faire. Il faut donc comprendre que c'est un mandat politique suprême qui nous a été donné et donc de ce point de vue-là, nous sommes dans une dynamique de co-construction qui permettra que dans les années qui viennent, que nous soyons dotés d'un instrument, pas seulement d'un instrument, mais d'un instrument qui jouit d'une acceptabilité consensuelle de toutes les différentes composantes de notre écosystème de gouvernance. Parce que nous avons le mandat des ministres des Finances, comme on vous l'a dit, que nous avons eu depuis 2024. On a le mandat des ministres des Finances de travailler sur cette question. Deuxièmement, nous avons le mandat des banques centrales. Et plus important encore, nous avons le mandat de l'Union africaine parce que cette directive a été approuvée au plus haut sommet des instances de gouvernance de l'Union africaine par l'Assemblée des chefs d'État et de gouvernement. Donc, vous voyez que nous avons suivi le processus jusqu'à maturité et que c'est un processus inclusif et tous les acteurs privés, institutionnels et tous les régulateurs sont partis de ce processus qui reste ouvert. Et nous invitons encore tous ceux qui sont intéressés à nous rejoindre dans cette formidable aventure qui, nous sommes convaincus, permettra d'accélérer le développement des services financiers en Afrique. Sabine.
Merci beaucoup. Reminding again for English language to go to or to use the interpretation because we are having these questions in French. Dr. Makta, il y a une question qui dit, en Afrique, les pays n'ont pas le niveau réglementaire, le même en tout cas, en matière de transactions financières. Donc, comment est-ce que un système, ou en tout cas ce référentiel d'harmonisation des politiques et des réglementations sur les services de paiement permettrait de résoudre ce problème de différence de maturité au niveau réglementaire pour les différents pays?
Je pense que c'est une bonne question parce que les systèmes de paiement Services Directive pour Afrique vise à harmoniser les règles et pratiques financières entre les pays africains afin de réduire les disparités qui freinent les transactions internationales. Also, ceci crée un cadre commun qui facilite l'intégration des services financiers numériques et sécurise les paiements transfrontaliers. Bon, chaque pays, le contexte, on le connaît en Afrique, il y a une fragmentation réglementaire. Chaque pays applique ses propres règles, sens de contrôle, d'échange, de fiscalité et de données. Et la conséquence est que les entreprises et investisseurs rencontrent des obstacles pour effectuer des paiements transfrontaliers, ce qui ralentit l'intégration économique et limite l'accès aux marchés internationaux. Donc, le PSDA peut résoudre ces différences par l'harmonisation des licences et l'accès au système de paiement. Donc, on peut proposer des licences proportionnées et uniformes pour les prestataires de services financiers. Cela garantit un niveau de concurrence équitable et réduit les barrières d'entrée pour les fintechs et les banques opérant dans plusieurs pays. Il y a aussi l'alignement des exigences conformes au KYC, I think it is la connaissance du client, et la lutte contre le blanchiment. Le PSD permet aussi la simplification des contrôles de change et des rapports financiers parce que si le PSD propose des procédures simplifiées et proportionnelles, ceci peut réduire les coûts administratifs des entreprises. Of course, very important, c'est l'interopérabilité des systèmes interconnectés entre les pays africains. Aussi, il propose un cadre réglementaire cohérent. C'est tous ces points-là qui vont permettre d'avoir un impact sur le continent, focalisé sur la réduction des coûts de transaction, l'accélération de l'intégration économique et le renforcement de la confiance et aussi l'inclusion financière. Bon, ça, c'est ce que je pouvais apporter comme élément de réponse à cette question. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Makta. I am now switching back to English. So, Dr. Patrick, we have a question about alignment of this PSDA journey with other initiatives, particularly the G20 roadmap for cross-border payment and the work that's being done by the Financial Stability Board, FSB, and of course, the different task force within the Bank of International Settlement, BIS, and of course the CPMI task force. So any perspective you want to share on this question?
Thank you very much, Sabine, and thanks to that very important question. What we have to say about that is that the African Union today is a full member of the G20, and we are now contributing, on equal footing on the design of international policies that are shaped at the G20. And in this, we have been, one of the continents that has been vocal in terms of the work towards regulatory harmonization. It is true that, when you look at the continent today, you can have the impression that we are lagging behind. And it is true because we have a continent that is under construction. We are rebuilding the foundation of the prosperity that we are looking forward. And in that perspective, the work that we're doing on the PSDA is responding and is fully aligned with all those international mechanisms and settlements and systems that are in place. Africa is the only continent, because if I take one example with regards to the financial stability on the continent, we are the only continent in the world without clear instruments that are dealing with financial stability. And when we talk about stability, financial stability, digital payment systems, and the huge amount of uncertainties that are emerging from that are part of the the issues that needs to be considered. The PSDA in this framework will, as we said already, bring regulatory certainty, but also shape the narrative of a continental landscape that clearly responds to the challenges that we are facing in the international, in the international setting. So it is our response. It is not, an overall response, but it is a response to a specific problem that we have seen being a prominent problem for the continent. So that is what I can say for now. But I do believe that this conversation is, one of those conversations that will be entertained, in the future to make sure that we bring clarity and certainty on what we do at the G20 and what we are aiming to do on the continent. Sabine.
Thank you very much, Dr. Makta. And actually, I would like to add a perspective from AfricaNenda Foundation to this question. While I'm doing so, can I ask Serge and Nick to come on video and join us? I want to share the fact that these efforts are not in silo. And AfricaNenda Foundation role is really more of a facilitator and convener and really advocating to build a consensus with the different stakeholders in the ecosystem, regulator, private sector, development agencies, to come together and be able to walk this path to, what we want to realize, the Africa we want. And
I think Sabine is having a challenge. So, Nick, maybe you can start because we have gotten the essence of what you wanted to submit.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you very much. It's a shame that, Sabine, we lost you. Maybe if you can hear us, you're able to rejoin shortly. Are we bringing the session to a close?
No, she had a question for you, but no, maybe she wanted to have your perspective, on the discussion that we just are concluding, to make sure that, we give that perspective the way that needs to be considered. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, great discussion, and thank you very much to all our esteemed panelists. I hope the audience appreciated it as well. I'm a big advocate of pan-jurisdictional coordination and collaboration. It's something that we here at CCAF we advocate for. We definitely think that regulators from across jurisdictions should work together, share lessons learned, share perspectives. And where there's an opportunity to do something at this scale of collaboration, I think it's something which should definitely be jumped on. It's fascinating to hear that this piece of work is going to move forward. Very exciting.
I guess
Sabine, we lost you for a second. You're back.
Excellent.
Yes, I was gonna say these are the times where you're in the passion and technology is just not working for you. I truly apologize, some connectivity issues. But again, we are represented at the CPMI PI task force, and I've been for the last, I think 2 years, member of that task force with the BIS. So I want to reassure that we are not working in silo, and we are really looking at tapping into the work that has been done already, the lessons that we have learned, and how do we bring that forth in the journey that Africa is taking towards cross-border payments. So just that was my addition to that question. Sorry, back to you, Nick. I think I interrupted you.
No problem at all. Thank you very much. No, nothing else from me, Sabine. Much appreciated.
I know, Dr. Patrick, that we have closing statements from you. Is this the right time?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sabine. I would like, on behalf of the African Union Commission, first of all, to thank you, Nick, and to thank the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance and AfricaNenda for convening this very important and timely session. What we've discussed today is part of the commitment that we have made to address cross-border payment system on the continent, because our aim is to make sure that payment systems operate efficiently and that they deliver on our goal to achieve economic transformation and to move Africa out of the poverty and inequalities that we see on the continent. As I said earlier, Africa is the continent of the future, and Africa is the continent that has the potential, the transformative potential that can be seen anywhere in the world. When we look at the macroeconomic data, you can see that Africa is the second fastest growing economy in the world, and yet our growth potential remains untapped because industrialization is still at a growing phase. Agriculture hasn't been fully tapped because we are endowed with 60% of the arable lands in the world. So it is certainly the reservoir that can be bringing Africa to the level of being the breadbasket of the world. Africa is also an ecosystem of transformative processes. When you look at the digital payment systems in the continent and even worldwide, you can see that the continent that has posted the most important growth in terms of digitalization is Africa. And those data are highlighting a fundamental fact that Africa is the continent of the future, and that investors should understand the continent and work towards achieving its transformation. At the G20, we have absolutely break barriers last year with the South African G20 presidency, where we have highlighted some of the critical challenges, some impediments to growth in the continent that are not only related to our fundamentals, but that are related to a broken international financial system that we need to fix together. And we have worked in this in view of changing the narrative of how people understand the continent, because the continent is presented as one of the most, riskier continent in the world. But when you look at facts, you will see that Africa is not risky at all the way the other continents are. When we take the example of investing in infrastructure, and it speaks to digital investment in infrastructure, if you take that example, you will see that Africa has the lowest default in terms of investing in infrastructure compared to other regions of the world, which speaks to the issue that there is a high risk perception that is posted on the continent. And this speaks to the issue of regulations and harmonization, because when there is a broken system, a fragmented system, as was highlighted by all the panelists, that I want to really congratulate, because you were absolutely exceptional in presenting the case of the PSDA as a tool that can address this fragmentation. So for us, we are absolutely committed to support this process as the African Union Commission. As I said, we have the political legitimacy, we have the technical capacities, we have the commitment and the political will to be there. Now, one word that I want us to keep into our minds is trust. And as you could believe, it was a word that was used several times, trust. We need to have faith and trust in Africa. That is the first thing. Should we not, as son and daughters of the continent, have trust on the processes that we are putting in place, we will not be able to achieve any transformation. It is therefore important that we put trust in the systems, in the processes that we are building, for us to get the credibility and to have the political legitimacy that is required to move forward. Trust is about citizens having trust in the systems. Trust is about citizens participating fully in the systems. And now, when we look at the PSDA, it is a practical response to a non-bottleneck in Africa's integration. We have to address it to make sure that we use the mandate and the clear call that was formulated to transform our continent. The African Continental Free Trade Area, as I said, is the largest market in the world in terms of participating countries. There are 55 countries. There is no other region with such a number of countries participating. It is important, therefore, that keeping in mind the vision and aspirations of our forefathers, that we build a unified market, a market that speaks in unison in terms of rules, regulations that are harmonized across the board. It is only in that perspective that we will be able to achieve the Africa we want, the Africa that is prosperous, integrated, peaceful, and a global force in the arena of nations. So with this, I would like to once again thank you sincerely for your active participation as panelists, as participants, and look forward to seeing you very soon in another engagement that we do believe will come when we complete some of the processes that were presented at the inception of our work today. With this, I am pleased to conclude the meeting and to thank you once again for your wonderful participation. Sabine.
Thank you, Dr. Patrick. I'm really sorry to say we can't close because I just realized I missed one critical question. This is the first cross-border discussion that I've had facilitated where FX, currency exchange, did not come into the discussion. There is a question on the Q&A saying that, foreign exchange policies are getting tighter with the dependency on the US dollar. It becomes always challenging settlement between the countries. This explains the rise also of usage of cryptocurrency, sometimes outside the control of many central banks. What are your thoughts? Kwame, you want to start? 30 seconds for each of you to give us your perspective, and then we'll close.
Okay. So as it stands right now, this question, I think my response will vary from country to country because as it stands, as countries like Ghana are regularizing virtual assets, and that includes, in this case, stable coins. I think we all have come to the conclusion that blockchain-based technologies are going to be part of our social and economic future. And to that extent, I made a point about being open-minded, consider the fact that there should be no sacred cows, and figure out how we build some of these emerging architectures into our broader architecture, especially when you see what's happening in the US with the Genius Act and the Clarity Act. You're going to see that in several jurisdictions as well. The earlier we begin to understand what that technology means for us and perhaps take advantage of it and leapfrog, the better it is for us. This is the continent that did M-Pesa. So
thank you. 30 seconds. Kennedy.
Well, this is the part where I'll talk about the industry I represent. I'll probably say mobile money is the cheapest form of international money transfer currently, but I think the industry is ready to partner with new innovations within the sector. And I think it's exciting to see what opportunities crypto will bring in and look at co-creation opportunities.
Excellent. Maktar, your perspective?
I think I will follow Dr. Kwame for blockchain. We are not at the same level as the countryside. We need to push this reflection in collaboration with AU on the issue of cryptocurrency. We already started maybe 5 years ago to look at the blockchain, but it is time now, given we already have this AI strategy, we already adopt this global digital compact. We need to work closely together with AUC to come up with a continental regulation framework and also a technical standard for the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Patrick, you want to touch this 30 seconds?
Yes, just quickly, because I concluded already.
Yes,
No,
I'm sorry.
We have, as I said, it is an exciting journey. And, you know, part of the response is already encapsulated in some of the, you know, documents of the African Union. Because if you look at the Constitutive Act itself, it is speaking to the issue to have a central bank, a unique central bank on the continent. Unique central bank with a common currency. So that also is a response to what we have in comparison to you know, the US dollar domination. It is also the reason why we have PAPS, because PAPS is simplifying, you know, operations across countries to make sure that we are not only fragmented in terms of the unconvertibility of our financial, our currencies. So those responses are a broad basket that we do believe responds, in addition to the PSDA, to the challenge that we are facing. So with this, I think we can bring the meeting to a close. Sabine, over to you. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to all of you. I'm going to pass it on to Nick. I just want to say that at AfricaNenda Foundation, all of my colleagues, we are determined. We are here to continue the advocacy, and we collaborate with CCAF and any other organization to continue the advocacy for this Payment Service Directive for Africa, and also facilitate as extensive consultations as possible public-private regulators so that we can accelerate the pathway. Nick, to you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sabine, and thank you so much to all of our esteemed speakers. What a fascinating conversation about such an important topic. I'll just end by saying it's fantastic to see such excited debate about such big opportunities, and I continue to promote the collaboration and cross-border discussion that we're having today. Thank you so much to all of our speakers, and thank you to all of our audience for staying with us. I hope you all enjoyed the session, and I very much look forward to the next one. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.